Hey guys, welcome back to another League of Legends video, and for today I want to talk about the best abilities in mid lane. Sorry for taking so long to release this episode. I've been working on a whole bunch of other projects, but don't worry, I'll make sure to finish the last 3 episodes. For those who haven't looked at the top and jungle episode, in this mini-series I look at every champion whose primary role, so in this case mid lane, and then I select the best passive, Q, W, E, and ultimate ability based on their general applications. From what people have told me, it's similar to Dota's draft, ability draft game mode or whatever it's called. I don't play Dota, so I wouldn't know. So let's bring up the ground rules for my evaluation. The abilities I choose are being graded based on their performance in a vacuum, as in how well they function assuming we just look at that ability's description and nothing else. For example, if you look at a champion like Vars, his ultimate is really dang strong, but only because it can deal true damage on research targets. Thing is, that true damage component doesn't exist without his passive organic deconstruction, so his ultimate isn't that great without the inclusion of his passive. Aside from that, I'll be choosing the best abilities with overall reliability in mind. There are certain situations where you would want to have a shield versus hard crowd control, or where you would want mobility over damage. Some abilities have really good synergies with others, such as if you combine Urgot's W with Darius's passive for the fastest 5-stack bleed of your life. But suffice to say, I can't cover every single scenario in the game, so I'm not going to try to. Lastly, the pool of champions for each role I'll be sifting through are those of their main role. For example, someone like Renekton can be played mid, but you mostly see him in the top lane, so he would not be included in the mid lane for my selection. At the end of this video, feel free to share your own thoughts on the best abilities for mid lane. For a lot of champions, their core gameplay is determined by their passive, and for some it may just be a small element of their kit. Usually, newer champions released have their whole theme centered around what kind of passive they have. And in the mid lane, you have a mixture of old and new champions with passives ranging from a single line of text to massive paragraphs that take 5 years to figure out. But I think when it comes to the mid lane, there's one that we can probably unanimously agree on would be absolutely broken on almost every champion in the entire game, and I choose Katarina's Veracity. It's a simple ability. Scoring a kill or assist within 3 seconds of being damaged by her reduces all of her cooldowns by 15 seconds. Essentially, it completely resets your Q, W, and E, and greatly reduces your ultimate cooldown. There is a reason she's called the face roll champion, at least before her rework. You don't get any benefit from the second part of her passive since there aren't any daggers for you to pick up, but the reset mechanic provides so much value in and of itself. On the original champion, Veracity is the most important part of Katarina's kit, given that her Q, W, and E in relativity are really weak abilities. Just imagine how strong it would be to have a brand new Q, W, E, and ultimate. Honorable mentions go to Annie's Pyromania, Twisted Fate's Loaded Dice, and Veigar's Phenomenal Evil. Annie's passive is balanced around the fact that she has decently long cooldowns outside of her Q, but it's basically a way better version of Kenan's passive. You get anywhere between a 1.25 seconds or a 3/4 second stun applied on every 4th ability. It would be so abusable on someone with a spammable ability like Cassiopeia's Twin Fangs, because you can press E 4 times in like 3 seconds and essentially become old Rise with permastuns instead of roots. But it does depend on what her abilities will have to be, so I think it's a bit too conditional to be the best one. Twisted Fate has a very simple passive, but one that can give you an unfair advantage if you build your theory champion to not need a passive to function properly. Every time you last hit or get a takedown on any unit, you gain on average 4 gold per kill, which can put you much further ahead in gold than any of your opponents if you just farm well, to the point where even if everyone was on equal footing, you would still be a full item ahead of them just by doing what you normally do. But it doesn't provide you with any immediate combat value, which is why it's more of a gimmicky passive than an all-purpose one. I don't think anyone would mind having this passive though. I think it goes without saying why Veigar's passive is on this list. It's the same thing as Annie, where Veigar's AP stacking is balanced by relatively high cooldowns and his skill shots can be difficult to land. Just imagine if you put this passive on someone with once again a spammable ability like Cassiopeia. You would be stacking so much ability power you could probably reach like 600 by 20 minutes. That being said, it is a scaling passive, which means it is somewhat useless until mid to late game, so you'll essentially have to survive the early game without one. Believe it or not, it was really hard to pick the best Q because despite consisting of mostly very powerful mages and carries, mid lane champions tend to have rather simple or underwhelming Qs because their best abilities are usually their W or their ultimate, whereas Q is just damage. So after thinking about it for a while, I'd have to go with Anivia's Flash Frost. At a glance, it isn't the most threatening thing you would expect, but it has an incredibly high base damage of 330 at max rank with a solid 70% AP ratio. It makes it a decent choice to have for any mage or even AP assassin, since getting up close and personal allows you to toss Flash Frost and detonate it at point blank range to stun enemies. Part of what made this skill shot harder than usual to land with Anivia is that she usually had to use it from long distance, which made it avoidable given its slow projectile speed, but most of you who know if you go up against Anivia and are in melee range, she gets an on-demand point-and-click stun basically. I still don't know how good I feel about choosing it as the best Q, but in all honesty, everyone's Q in the mid lane is either average or just bad when used by itself. Fortunately with this, you now have an easy access to AoE crowd control at your disposal with a modest cooldown. Honorable mentions go to LeBlanc's Sigil of Malice, Vladimir's Transfusion, and Zoe's Paddle Star. Sigil of Malice would be the better option over Flash Frost if you were strictly building an assassin. It has slightly more damage if you detonate the mark and a lower cooldown and being point and click, but that's mostly all it does, it's just damage. However, it is still a very strong burst option that can't be matched too easily. It would be, I think, one of the best Qs in the mid lane in terms of damage, and detonating the mark won't be too difficult either. Vladimir's Transfusion is a strong sustain option that scales well if you build a lot of ability haste, as the empowered Q is tied to the ability itself, meaning it can be really potent for dealing huge damage and healing you, especially if you're playing a more mobile champion since Vlad's weakness is that he's kinda slow. Thing is, it really only gets going in the mid game once you get a few items, and being dependent on ability haste is a lot worse with the changes to items since you can't rush 40% CDR by 8 minutes like you did back in the past. I think it's self-explanatory why Zoe's Paddle Star is on the list. Extremely high burst damage if you can fire it from high enough range, and it has a whopping 550 base damage and 150% AP scaling. Why it's not the best ability is because you need some way to get close to enemy champions but then get out very quickly. Zoe is one of the few champions in the game who can do that with Portal Jump. Thing is, if you don't have it, it's going to be a lot harder to throw max range Paddle Stars unless you play an assassin and all you're hoping for is just one Q. It would be the best ability, I think, if not for that condition. I mentioned a few minutes ago that mid lane champions are known for really strong Ws and ultimates, and that was no small exaggeration. As you know, W is usually reserved as the utility spell ranging from shields, to crowd control, to dashes, to buffs. And there's a lot of them that are strong on their original champion but can be game breaking on any other, by leaps and bounds. No W comes close in value than Zed's Living Shadow. By itself, it's a really solid ability since you can use it as either a gap closer or an escape. But if that wasn't enough, the Shadow copies whatever offensive ability you use. Well, technically it says Razor Shuriken and Shadow Slash, but it basically means it copies your Q and E. Think about it for a moment. 2 casts of any offensive attack. With this, you can cast 2 Anivia Qs, you can throw 2 Sigils of Malice at a single target if both you and the Shadow are in range, basically guarantees a mark detonation on top of a second mark. You can use Transfusion twice for instant empowered Q with 1 cast. Living Shadow might actually just be the straight up best W in the entire League of Legends. 2 Aurelion Soul Qs, 2 Ari Qs, 2 Echo Qs, 2 Lux Qs, 2 Xerath Qs, 2 literally any damage dealing Q in the game. Or even if you take Living Shadow into the top or bot lane, imagine 2 Aatrox Qs, 2 Mordekaiser Qs, 2 Darius Qs, 2 Sivir Qs, 2 Ezreal Qs. This ability doubles your Q and E. I genuinely can't think of a better W in the game than Zed's, because if you can apply this to any other offensive ability, that could lead to the most wild shenanigans possible. Imagine 2 Blitz Hooks, 2 Thresh Flays, 2 Alistar Qs. But I digress, we're supposed to be talking about mid lane, but I think you get the point by now. Honorable mentions go to Cassiopeia's Miasma, LeBlanc's Distortion, and Twisted Fate's Pick a Card. Cassiopeia's Miasma single-handedly invalidates some champions and can be used to set up an easy flash frost stun if we're using Anivia's Q. There's honestly no downside to it, or any of the honorable mentions to be honest, but again, no one can beat Zed's Shadow, I don't care who they are. Even so, a huge AoE slow that prevents enemies from using any movement ability is something you can definitely make use of. LeBlanc's Distortion is a dash, it does good damage, and it allows her to blink right back if she wants to. So then I guess you could make use of Zoe's Paddle Star since Distortion works in a similar way to Portal Jump, but I still think that's more of a gimmicky thing. It's definitely a very powerful W because it has so much value in combat. Twisted Fate's W gives you essentially an endless stream of mana, a ranged magic damage Tiamat that also slows, and a point and click stun all in one. There's a reason Twisted Fate has only 2 abilities because his cards have so much versatility and power depending on the situation. E in the mid lane consists of either a dash, blink, or supplementary damage that would usually come with crowd control. For the most part, they all have their functions, which means it all comes down to whichever ability would suit your personal preference. I would have to choose Fizz's Playful Trickster. There's a reason people hate him so much, and it mostly comes down to this ability. A 2-part dash with very high damage that makes you untargetable for a little over a second. It does come with high mana cost and a decently long cooldown, but it's amazing for offense, defense, and outplay potential. If, assuming we take Zed's W, that gives you 2 AoE bursts of magic damage at your disposal. Although given the nature of Shadow Slash, I don't think getting 2 Playful Tricksters on a single target will do double damage. So if we pair up Zed's W and Fizz's E, you will be one of the most slippery champions in the game, and if you score takedowns with Veracity, you'll be able to reset that and just be dashing left, right, up, down, back, front all over a team fight. Honorable mentions go to Yone's Soul Unbound, Kassadin's Force Pulse, and Veigar's Event Horizon. Yone's E has tons of different uses outside of Yone that could be exploited on a lot of champions. Being able to quickly move into deal trades or assassinate a target and then blink back to safety can be valuable for many damage dealers. Simply put, it gives you a move speed buff and causes you to deal 25 to 35% more damage to champions. Not too shabby at all. Kassadin's Force Pulse is balanced by his long cooldowns early on, but if you pair this with a spammable Q or W, it's a very strong magic damage nuke with deceptively high range, but its inconsistency can leave much to be desired since it also depends on what champions are on the enemy team and if they have spammable abilities. Finally, Veigar's Event Horizon is one of the best zoning and lockdown tools in the game. A wide cage that stuns anyone who touches the ring and prevents them from dashing through it. Definitely useful to have for a lot of situations because if anyone trapped in it has their flash on cooldown, it's basically certain death. That being said, it doesn't deal any damage and it doesn't guarantee the stun, so enemy champions can still fight back, making it somewhat of a risk and reward ability. The mid lane has no shortage of amazing ultimates, ranging from huge burst damage abilities to unparalleled teamfight pressure. But if I were to choose the ultimate with the best all-around coverage, it would have to go to LeBlanc's Mimic for essentially the same reasons as Zed's W. Allowing you to cast any of your basic abilities a second time in a row leads to even more crazy shenanigans because you can throw out a shadow, then use LeBlanc R on a Q or E, and then all of a sudden you have 4 Anivia Qs, 4 LeBlanc Qs, 4 Blitz Hooks, well, not Blitz Hooks because he's a support, but you get what I mean. Alternatively, you can toss out a shadow and then another shadow. It just allows for so many impossible things to suddenly become possible. You can throw out another 2 Veigar cages after you just threw 2 already, there's just no end to it. If you opt out of taking Zed's shadow and swap in Twist to Fate's gold card, you can do 2 point and click gold cards one after another. Again, so many fancy things you can do with this ability. If you had access to every Q, W, and E in the entire game, it would lead to so many broken combos that you couldn't even think of. It's always hard to choose honorable mentions for ultimates since they're supposed to be the champion's best ability, but if I were to narrow it down, I would choose these 5. Zed's Deathmark has the same level of stupid bullshit that you can pull off while also serving as an execute, but it can't pull off nearly as much as LeBlanc's Mimic. Essentially, with these two, it depends on whether or not you want more burst damage or more stupid bullshit. Ari's Spirit Rush grants you 3 quick dashes that can be used to reposition in a teamfight, chase after fleeing targets, or put some distance between you and pursuers. Generally a very consistent and reliable ultimate for anyone to have. Echo's Chrono Break, for all intents and purposes, is a get out of jail free card. It allows you to dive recklessly into a fight and blink right back out provided you're not immobilized or silenced. Or it can double as a giant AoE nuke if the enemy team doesn't pay attention to where your Echo is. Twisted Fate's Destiny Gate provides you global true sight and the ability to teleport pretty much anywhere you want on the map. It doesn't give you any benefits in terms of damage, but in macro focus games there's no better ultimate to have on a mid laner. It opens up ganks, split pushes, it counters stealth champions, it's just great in terms of coverage. Lastly, Azir's Emperor's Divide does good damage and creates a giant physical wall that can either be used to knock enemies into your team or to block off the backline while you deal with the now separated frontline. There's a lot of different ways you can make use of terrain manipulation with this ability. Sorry about not giving a more thorough reasoning for each choice, but again, the mid lane has so many amazing ultimates that it's really hard to decide which one would just be the best for honorable mentions. So with that all established, let's line up what we have for our abilities. We have Katarina passive, we have Anivia Q, we have Zed W, we have Fizz's E, and LeBlanc's ultimate. The champion I was designing was mostly meant to be very solo queue focused, hence why I chose things like Zed Shadow and LeBlanc ult, but then again, it depends on what champion you're looking for. Funny thing you could try is maybe Xerath Q and ZW so you can poke people off the screen. I'm pretty sure everyone would want to pick up at least Zed Shadow just because there's so much crazy stuff you can do with it. But what do you think? Once again, let me know your own list of abilities in the comment section below. If you agree or disagree with my choices, or if you think there's a better selection of abilities, please let me know about that as well. Thanks to everyone who watched all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to support my channel, best way you can do so is like the video, leave a comment, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Consider donating to my Patreon if you want to support me even further, join my Discord and follow me on Twitter. Lastly, if you want to check out my best abilities for top and jungle, there should be a link popping up soon on the end card, so you can go check that out. But thank you all so much for watching this episode, and I hope to see you again soon for the next one. Take care.